Good evening, everybody. My name is Annette Reynolds, and I'm the current president of the League of Women Voters of Waltham. And I am delighted to have Mort Isaacson here tonight to kick off our Know Your City series. Let me tell you a little bit about Mort. I said to him, you've got to give me a bio so everybody knows how fantastic you are. Mort got his PhD in mechanical engineering at MIT. And he said that little technical institute in Cambridge down the street from Harvard. Then he did 7 years of postdoc on the West Coast at California Institute of Technology, Caltech. Yeah. In civil and environmental engineering. Then he came back and he taught over at BU for a long time. He's retired now. He moved to Waltham, had lived in Belmont, been a member of the Belmont League of Women Voters.
Oh, no, Arlington.
Arlington, my bad. Arlington League of Women Voters. And when he moved into Waltham, he joined our lovely group. So it is a pleasure to have you here tonight, Mort.
Okay, is it my turn? Okay.
It's your turn. It's your turn.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming to this Zoom webinar. I did want to preface what I say tonight, first of all, by saying that my participation in this was not cleared at all by the Waltham Historical Commission or the other entity in the city. And so what I say here are basically the facts of the situation, and I'll try to refrain from expressing opinions. And if I do happen to express an opinion, please note that those are my own personal opinions and not that of any official body on these things. Okay, so let's begin. This is a talk about the Waltham Historical Commission. And so I will try to do some screen sharing here, and we'll see how that runs.
And it looks like we're good.
Okay, good. So to get the dry stuff out of the way first, talking about what is the legal basis for the commission. So the authority is, the Historical Commission is established under the authority of the City of Waltham General Ordinances number 22468. And I won't go into details about that. And pursuant to the general laws of Massachusetts, additional authority is provided in the city's delayed demolition ordinance and in the deed for the Robert Tree Payne estate, Stonehurst. And I'll add to this that it also does have some authority from the deed for the William Wellington House. And we'll talk about those houses later on in the talk. So the commission is made up of 7 volunteer members. The members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council. In addition, we have 1 part-time paid office administrator, and that's Pam Lyons. So the quorum for the board, for the commission, and maybe I'll stop sharing here and just talk. The quorum for the commission is 7 members. 4 members. It's a 7-member commission, and so majority is 4 members, and so the quorum is 4 members. It is a quasi-judicial body, which means that we have to follow open meeting law, we have to have public hearings, and we have to follow conflict of interest regulations. So the current members of the board of the commission, and I thought it would be interesting to say who's actually on the board, so you get an idea of the range of expertise and input that we have on the commission. First of all, Marie Daly, who probably many of you know, who's certainly the most knowledgeable historian of Waltham in the city, and she's probably the most knowledgeable historian on Waltham in the world. Katie Holmes, who is the professional preservationist for the city of Newton. She's living now in Waltham and has volunteered to be on our commission and help us. To Rebecca Migdal, who's a professional historical collection specialist. Kathy Dufermont, who's a former Waltham teacher, and Maria Russo, who's a current Waltham teacher. And both Kathy and Maria I think, play a very important role on the commission in that they bring community input into our decision making and have a much better sense possibly on the pulse of the community than some of the others of us who haven't been in the city as long. And Sean Wilson is the 7th member. He's an investment counselor, and he's our CPC representative. So one of the members of the Community Preservation Committee also has to be a member of the Historical Commission, and that's Sean's office. I was asked to say something about our budget. And so I'll quickly just give you a summary of the commission's budget. It, in fact, runs about $50,000 per year, but it gets confusing if you look at the city's budget as to how the money stacks up, because the salary of our part-time office administrator, Pam Lyons, is actually under the building department. She's part-time for us and she's part-time for the building department. And so her salary actually appears in the budget under the building department. So of that budget, about $7,000 of it, or $7,000 actually, is I call them the stipends to the commission members. Each member of the commission is paid $100 for the 10 legally mandated meetings that we have per year. So that's $700 per member. Sorry, $1,000 per member, or $7,000 per year. And I think that's pretty typical for all the commissions and boards in the city. Then the part-time office worker, as I say, is approximately $30,000 per year. For her, although, as I say, part of that money appears in the building department budget, $2,000 per year for office equipment and supplies, like the printing, the printer that we have to share with other commissions in the office, and $1,000 for printing and postage for the year. And then we have some money in an account for the Payne estate. And again, we'll talk more about the about Stonehurst a little later in the talk. But about $6,500 is in the budget for furnishings and maintenance of those furnishings. So, for instance, there have been a number of paintings on the wall at the Payne estate that have deteriorated with time. And so we've had those out for restoration. There were also some cushions on one of the benches in the big public room there that were getting worn, and so we had to replace them. And of course, to replace and repair items in a historical house, that has to be done properly, and so it's not cheap. In addition, there's $4,000 in the budget for the Payne estate that goes to landscaping around the house. We had asked for an increase of $1,000 in that for this year's budget, and the mayor originally did grant us that increase in that money, but then along came COVID, and all of the city departments and commissions and boards had to reduce their budgets, and so we fell back to what it had been the previous year. So I guess that's a rundown on our budget. So maybe I should stop here and ask if there are any questions on these technical details before I go on. Annette?
Not seeing anything coming,
No.
but let me ask you a question, Mort. We're talking, whoops, Joan did. Joan, can you just type the question in the Q&A box? Well, she's doing that. It doesn't seem like a big amount of money for the number of buildings or even just the Payne estate. Are there other places if you want to do more upkeep or anything else? And also for the Payne estate, I know that if people use it, they pay money. Does that come into your budget?
No, the answer is no, it doesn't come into our budget. That's all separate.
Okay.
from our budgets. And I might say that for major issues, major items, and we'll talk about some of these as we go forward, we certainly are in working with the CPC, the Community Preservation Committee, for CPA grants for major things for the Wellington House, for the Payne Estate, and so on. And I'll mention some of those as we go forward.
Did get a question here. How long do the members of the commission serve?
Well, it says until replaced.
Oh.
It's you're taken on for 3 years or until replaced, the ordinance so says.
Okay.
So I've been there 5 years, and I don't 5 or 6 years, something like that, and I don't remember being renewed. But so far, nobody has come to the door and said you can't come in here. So, so to answer your question, no, it's till replaced, basically.
I've got a couple more questions here. Let me throw them out, and if you're going to cover them a little bit later, just let me know. How do you handle grants from the state or any other grants that you get?
Well, I'll try to talk this maybe a little later, but basically, we work through the purchasing department, basically, for things. So for instance, right now, we're working on hiring a consultant to do a historical survey of various parts of the city. And that involves $15,000 from the CPA and $15,000 from Mass Historic Commission pass-through funds, actually, from the federal government, from the Parks Department and National Parks Department. And so that grant is all being handled through the city purchasing.
So it doesn't show in your budget, but it's still money coming through to.
Correct.
Okay. And then somebody else mentioned CPA funds, but I think you answered that question. You are using CPA funds.
Yes. Hopefully I'll be able to talk more about that as we go on.
Okay.
Okay, so let's now get into some maybe more interesting stuff and to actually look at what the duties and responsibilities are of the commission, and in the process, I think I probably will give you a little bit of a history lesson on Waltham. So to begin with, let's look at the delayed demolition ordinance, or demo delay ordinance, as we usually refer to it as. And so I think what I want to do is go to the city website and open the website for the Historical Commission. Okay, let's see if this will work now as we drill down from level to level. I thought it does. So under city government, if we go to Historical Commission, did that come up?
Yes, it did.
Oh, good. Okay. So this is the website for the Historical Commission. You can easily get there through the city website. And I draw your attention to this list of links down the left side here. There's a lot of valuable information there, both on operation of the commission and also historical information on Waltham. And we'll come back to a number of these links as we go through the talk. But first of all, let's look at the demolition delay information here. And if we look at the ordinance, the demo delay ordinance, then this ordinance was passed in 2011, and I won't bore you with all the details of voting on it and so on. But I did want to mention that there are 2 stages to any kind of demolition delay decision. And what demolition delay decisions mean is that any building that's 75 years of age or older falls under our jurisdiction. So when the owner wants to have that building demolished, they have to apply to the building department for a permit, a demo permit. At the same time, they have to fill out an application for a demolition delay determination. And when that gets sent to us from the building department, that starts the clock ticking. And we have 15 days to reply back to the building department and the applicant as to whether or not that building is historically significant enough to warrant having something called a preferably preserved determination. Now, just determining whether a building is historically significant doesn't cause its demolition to be delayed. But what it does do is it sets up this hearing, this public hearing, at which we determine whether it should be preferably preserved. And if we make that determination at a public hearing, then the building can have a delay of up to a year placed on it. So for the first stage, we have to determine whether the building is historically significant. And so here are the criteria that the ordinance gives us for determining whether or not a building is historically significant. I might mention that these criteria are very similar to the kind of criteria you get for determining if a building goes on the National Register of Historic Places. So the first criterion is, that's here, whether or not the building is listed on or is within an area listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And then the second one here is the building has been found eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. Okay, so if either of those two are true, then I will automatically determine that the building is historically significant. And the ordinance basically gives me the power to determine that. Now, I do that in consultation with Marie and Katie, both of which whom are very experienced in these things. And if any one of the three of us feel that the building is historically significant enough to warrant a hearing, then we'll go on to the second stage. If not, then we just notify the building department that we will not interfere with any kind of demolition of the building. Then the third criterion here is the building is importantly associated with one or more historic persons or events, or the broad architectural, cultural, political, economic, or social history of the city or the Commonwealth. And so this one I think of as the people one. You know, were there historic people who lived here? Were these structures important in their lives? Do they have a story to tell? The fourth criterion here is the building is historically or architecturally important in terms of period, style, method of building construction, or associated with a recognized architect or builder, either by itself or in the context of a group of buildings. So this criterion I think of as the structure criterion, the building criterion. Is the building itself historically significant because of what it shows about architectural periods and how those architectural periods then relate to the history of the city. And so these, if any one of these four criteria are satisfied, in addition to the building being at least 75 years old, then it goes on to the second stage, the public hearing stage, where it's determined if there will be a delay put on the building. And once we make that determination that it's historically significant or not, we have 30 days in which to hold the public hearing and decide whether or not the building should be preferably preserved. So things can get very tight depending on whether or not an application comes in at the time we're holding one meeting, going on to the next meeting. So we have to be very careful on how we time things that we don't, in fact, miss a deadline. Because if we miss a deadline, then legally we can't, in fact, do anything about that building. And this has happened to us. And so we've learned to be extremely cautious about those kinds of legal time issues. So let me say something here about how many of these applications we receive per year, how many hearings we have, and so on. We have had roughly, in the city, roughly per year, there are 50 demolitions of buildings per year. That's roughly. About 30 of those come to us for review of one type or another. Now, In many cases, it's a very quick decision on my part that it's not significant, usually with Katie and Marie's input. For instance, a garage that was built in 1930, the house was built in 1850, the garage was added long afterwards, and there's nothing significant about the garage, then it's easy to determine that we don't have to have a hearing, a public hearing on that situation. So there are 30 reviews that come to us. Of those, about 12 per year we have hearings on. So typically we have 1 or 2, sometimes 3 hearings per meeting. So for instance, the meeting that's coming up in November, we already have 2 demo delay hearings scheduled for that meeting. Now, of those 12 hearings per year, we've never had more than 6 delays per year that we've imposed. In fact, like last year, there were 4 delays that we imposed on developers. So now what happens when we impose a delay? Well, it depends. The developer can, or the owner, the applicant can come back to us and say, you know, look, we've thought about what you said, and what we're going to do is try to preserve this much of the structure and add on to it this much, and would that be okay? Will you waive the rest of the delay? In some cases, we've actually had successes, and the owner will say, well, gee, I didn't realize the house was that important, that historic, and I won't tear it down. Usually what happens, though, is that the applicant just waits out the year and then demolishes the house. However, we have had some successes. And so here's where I want to see if I can give you some examples, a couple examples here where we've had successes and where those successes have been quite meaningful. This is, I believe it's number 1 to 3, Jackson Place. Jackson Place is a small little dead-end street here that comes off of Jackson Street, which runs between River Street and Central Street. Now, this house does not look very important, but if you'll notice, this house, this kind of little bungalow, is very similar to this one. It's very similar to the left half of this one. The right half was modified at some point with this 2-story brick addition. And very similar to this one back here, although this one had a brick facing put on it at some period. Well, these 4 little houses, in fact, are 4 of the most important houses, historic houses in the city, believe it or not. These are 4 of the original 7 mill girl boarding houses from the Boston Manufacturing Company mill that was built in 1814. These houses were built around 1817. And so let me see if we can go on. So this is the back of that house. Notice that it has this kind of T-shape to it. The top across the top there, and then the stem coming down here. This is a picture, a painting from the mid-1820s of the first successful industrial strength water-powered weaving mill in the country. This is the Boston Manufacturing Company mill on the Charles River where Moody Street crosses the river. Let me see if I can increase it somewhat. So this was the first mill building here that was built in 1814. It basically makes Waltham, if not the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, then certainly close to it. And the nursery, perhaps you could say, of the American Industrial Revolution. So in American industrial history, it's probably one of the most important buildings in the whole country. And you drive by it here on Moody Street probably every day. You know, it's that set of red brick buildings along the river here. It's the end of the building closest to Moody Street. That part of that long building, it all got connected in here later on. and now has a flat roof, whereas before it had this other type of roof. And these are the 7 original mill girl boarding houses. Now, the town of Lowell National Historical Park makes a big deal about their mill girl boarding houses that they've preserved. Those mill girl boarding houses took the ones here in Waltham as the example of what they needed to be. And then they built them in Lowell. Waltham preceded Lowell by about 5 years. And the same people who built Waltham then went on to build Lowell. And so we actually precede all those others that are considered so historical. And yet these buildings here, at least the 1-story ones. So here's a 1-story, here's a 2-story, here's a 1-story, here's a 2-story, 1-story, 2-story, 1-story. These are the 7 original ones. The 2 at this end were later added in the mid-20s, 1820s, and this one was added in the 1820s. So these are the original 7, and so are extremely important historically. Let's see if I can come back out here. And so there again is a blow up of it. So these are the 7 original ones, 4 double-story and 3 double-story, 4 single-story. This is a picture of the Boston Manufacturing Company mill that was taken in 1883, actually, from a church tower that had been on Moody Street. So it's across the end of the common here. This is where Carter Street is now. And these are those original mill girl boarding houses. There's one of the single-story boarding houses. There's one of the 2-story. That's one of the 2-story. That's a 2-story there, and that's a single-story there, one there. So we've got photographic evidence of what they look like. And let me show you another picture here, if I can. I guess I need to move this back all the way. Yeah, there we go. So this picture here is one that was taken in 1886. And it's looking across the Charles River. This is the old Moody Street Bridge before the current one was built. And so this is a 2-story mill girl boarding house that was built in the early 1820s. This is one of those single-story mill girl boarding houses from 1817, the original ones. And so this is what one of those 4 mill girl boarding houses on Jackson Place looked like in 1886. So these houses are extremely important historically. Well, what happened with that house was that a new owner bought it, wanted to rip it down and replace it with something else. I mean, it's not a really great building in its own right, but historically it's extremely significant. And we put a year delay on it. That building is still there. So this is at least 4 years later, I believe, and 3 or 4 years later. I hope it will continue to be there. However, there's no any kind of protection on that building. And how the city council might be able to come up with something to protect these kinds of resources, I'm not sure. That's a good
okay, Mort, I have a question here. What happened to the original mill girl houses?
Well, there were 7 of them. Here are 4 of them. The 3 2-story ones were moved across the street. Lowell Place is just across Jackson Street from these houses. And those 4 houses, three double-story mill girl houses are on Lawton Place, rather. Not Lowell Place, Lawton Place.
Okay.
And so they still exist. I believe they've been recognized and are on the National Register of Historic Places, but these 4 are not.
Okay. Another question that came in earlier. If a building is deemed worthy of conserving, who is then responsible for restoration and upkeep? How are they paid for it? Or or another way of framing that is what happens after that year?
Well, after that year, they either keep the building or demolish it. There are federal tax credits that you can qualify for if the building is an income-producing property. Then it's possible to get some federal benefit from that. But again, at the local level, there are no carrots. There's only the stick of the demo delay.
So that kind of answers another question. Is there any incentive for the city council to place further protections on some of the historic buildings or sites in Waltham?
What is considered an incentive to the city council? I mean, is preserving the historical resources possibly some of the most important in the country incentive? I don't know. Okay, let's look at another example here of a success story of this preservation, which in fact may help you a little in answering one of those earlier questions too about what happens afterwards. This house is on Oak Street, and I took this picture a couple weeks ago. This house came before us a year and a half ago, I think, something like that, for demolition. We didn't think much of it until Marie started doing research on the house. It turns out that this is an extremely important house from a historical point of view. If you'll notice, the house has a shed kind of thing that runs across the back of the house on both sides. And then it has a thin waist, an L at the back here, and then a crossing part here at the front. So that the whole house, if you look at it from above, from an airplane, looks like an H. With the top and the bottom here and this part here forming the middle part of the H. Well, if you look at some old maps of Waltham, and again, can you see this map?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is the south side of Waltham. The house I showed you before is on the north side of Waltham, you know, as they say, off River Street. This is the south side of Waltham. This is Newton Street here. Now, this is High Street here, as we call it now. I don't know what they called it then. And this is the Waltham, here it's called the Waltham Chemical Works. It was originally called the Newton Chemical Company. It was founded in 1825 to produce sulfuric acid for the bleachery, which was another part of the Boston Manufacturing Company that was across the river. In Waltham. And this is, again, extremely important from an industrial history point of view. This was one of the very earliest, one of the first commercially successful large-scale chemical processing plants in the country to produce the sulfuric acid. Before this, mostly large-scale production of chemicals was gunpowder, basically. From industrial history, this is very important. You notice it had a large area here. This is Pine Street, I believe, coming in along here now. So Pine and Newton and High, all that area. The workers for this complex lived in this area here. And this, you can see this house right here. Let me blow it up a little. That's this 44 Oak Street that we had come before us. So here is that same house. That's the part across the front, then the part connecting, and then that shed in the back forming an H shape. This map is from 1854. So we know that that house existed in 1854. Notice it says NC Co., Newton Chemical Company. So this was one of the boarding houses for the workers over here in the Newton Chemical Company. The Newton Chemical Company went out of business around 1870 or so. The buildings were all torn down. The retorts that were made of platinum were all sold off, and the land was then sold off for housing. And the company has a distinction of making more money for its investors when it went out of business than actually when it was in business, real estate deals. But In the city now, there are only 2 or 3 structures left that actually were related directly to the new chemical company. This house is one of them. You can see here, NCCO, this house is another one here. That house is still on the street too. So this was an extremely important historical house. The owner did have financial difficulties, and her real estate agent told us that there was no way that that house could possibly be saved so that it could be rehabilitated in any kind of economically feasible way. However, because it was so important, we still put the delay on that house. Now, she came back to, and by the way, as far as we were able to determine, that house had never been listed actually for sale in general listings of real estate stuff in the city. So it was some kind of deal between the real estate agent and developer, possibly. I don't know for sure, but and so we put the delay on it, and the owner came back to us a few months later, and again, she really did have great financial hardship involved here, and so the commission voted, and I don't remember whether it was a unanimous vote. I can't even remember how I voted anymore on it, but the commission voted to allow her to have a waiver, so to be able to demolish a house if she wanted to. However, somehow during that period, something happened. That delay that we had put on it, something happened, and you know, as you saw before, that house is still there. And in fact, if we look carefully here, the sign on the fence here says something about another community project supported by Patriot Community Bank. So kudos to Patriot Community Bank. Evidently, there was some financial institution that thought that that house could be rehabilitated. And you know, whether that was because of our delay or not, of course, I can't say for sure, but it seems to me very likely that had we not put that delay on, even for a few months, we would have lost that house. Now it's being rehabilitated and will be there, and we'll be able to point to it as historically significant.
Okay, Mort, I have a few more questions here.
Okay.
Somebody asked, is this where Chemistry Station is?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Let me see if I can point that out to you. Here is the railroad. That was the Watertown branch of the Fitchburg Railroad that swung down through the south side. And here, right, is where Chemistry Station Park is now, and Chemistry Station was located on Newton Street right about there where the arrow is.
Okay. Another question, would it help if Waltham had historic districts, especially if those districts needed to maintain the historic features of the buildings within the district?
The answer is yes, but it's much more complicated than that. There are many different kinds of historic districts, and so it gets a little confusing. I'll talk a little later about Macris, and there are state historic districts, which are not the same thing as local historical districts. What I think this questioner is asking about is something called a local historical district. Mm-hmm. And that carries special legal strength to it, which other types of districts don't. And yes, a local historic district is governed by a local historical district commission, which would be a commission that would report to my commission, but it wouldn't be the same commission, made up of other individuals, probably individuals related to that area. And in order to be included in a local historical district, the owners of the houses, buildings in that district have to agree to it. So that often boundaries of historical districts are drawn so that they exclude some house or something where the owner objected to being included. Before I was on the historical commission, and I forget who was the chair of the historical commission at the time, but they tried, in fact, to interest the homeowners in the Pleasant Street, Ellison Park area, in forming a local historical district in that area. And I went to 2 of the meetings, the neighborhood meetings that they had for that, to present the history of those areas, and they're extremely historically important. Pleasant Street itself was actually laid out as a cow path in 1669. We actually have a record in town meeting minutes for doing that. And the parsonages for the 3 first local ministers all lived along Pleasant Street. But there wasn't a single homeowner who came to any of those meetings that voiced any interest in the local historical district that I could recall. And so it's extremely difficult to get a local historic district established. It would take people in the neighborhood who really are enthusiastic about this, going to their neighbors and really talking their neighbors up about it. And that has not happened in this city. So I don't know if Annette, does that answer that question?
I think it does. I think it does.
Okay, so so there are a couple examples of the demo delay ordinance, what's involved in it, and that in fact we have had a couple examples of where all of that work has paid off. Am I back to the website now?
Back to the website.
Good. Sorry, it's so clumsy. If we look here at the next link down, it says historic property reports. So every time that a building comes before us for a demo delay determination, Marie daily prepares a report on the building and its historical significance. So we have put, now for buildings that are not that historically significant, reports can be quite short, but for ones that are significant, they can get quite long. And so on the website are the reports that Marie has written for all of the buildings that we've had hearings on. And so we can take, so here's the 44 Oak Street one here. So did that come up?
Yes, it did.
Good, good. So this is the kind of report that the commission has to judge the historical significance of these buildings. So here again, you can see the H shape, the bottom, the top, and the crossbar here for the building. And there's a picture of it, and then Marie goes through all of the historical maps. So that's the map from 1900. There's a map from 1875, map from 1854. By the way, many of these maps you can get either through the Historical Commission website or the Waltham Public Library website. Also has a collection of historic maps. There's a painting, a very famous painting that was done of the Newton Chemical Company in 1830. And so Marie has put together then a timeline of all of the owners and occupiers of that house and what its significance is, and then summarizes it for us. So before we make a decision, especially at the public hearing, before we make a decision and impose a demolition delay, we've done a lot of homework to be sure that we have a basis for what we're doing. Okay, so I think I've probably spent enough time talking about demo delays. Were there any other questions related to demo delay?
Excuse me. The only other question that came up had to do with incentivizing the city council. So let's hold off on that.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So talking about city council, another one of the duties that the Historical Commission has is advising the city council for development prospectuses and special permits. So let me again go back here and see if we can step forward to the next, yes, picture here. So now often for these development prospectuses and special permits, all we have to do is tell the city council if the site had historical significance or didn't. And since most of these things are for large industrial buildings, mostly we say it's not significant. However, sometimes the city council does come to us for help with an asset. And so here is an example. This was the first project, in fact, that I was involved in when I got drawn onto the commission. And this is the bridge on Farwell Street, which is the continuation of Seance Street across the river. And the actual official name for this bridge is the James J. Harold Bridge. It was in pretty poor shape. It actually is an important historical asset for the city because it's one of the three Art Deco structures in the city. There's this bridge, there's the courthouse on Linden Street, and there's the Fitch School on the south side. And those are the only three major Art Deco structures in the city, I guess. We had to oversee the historical rehabilitation of this bridge, and the developer of the, what is it called? Is it the Currents on the Charles or something like that? The apartment house at the corner of River and Seance Street. Mm-hmm. Had to fund this project as part of their special permit, the rehabilitation of the street running by their building. And so we were called in to give advice. These pylons here had very nice Art Deco lamps on the top of them originally, and so they had to replace all of that and repair the bridge. And so we were involved in that, and ultimately, you'll probably recognize some of these people. That was all successfully done, and a nice grand opening ceremony for the bridge. And we also, so this is what the bridge looks like today. I took those pictures a couple weeks ago. Notice the historic plaques we've put on the bridge too, as well as the nice lighting here, and the wording of the historic plaques was something that the Historical Commission worked on. So that's often something that's nice to be able to be done like that. Then another duty that the Historical Commission has is the oversight of properties owned by the city, historical oversight of properties owned by the city. And so there are two of them mainly that this affects. And I must say that legally, there are only two that we have historical oversight over. The first one is Stonehurst, and in fact, it's not Stonehurst, obviously, it's Wellington House. So let me.
Well, why don't you talk about Wellington House while you have it right there?
Okay, all right, I'll go on and talk about Wellington House. We are working on getting the Wellington House open to the public. And the problem with the Wellington House is that although an appreciable amount of city money has already been spent rehabilitating it, the rehabilitation has not been completed yet. And I cannot speak for what happened before I became chair. I wasn't, or before I came on the commission, I wasn't there. I didn't have responsibility for it and don't know exactly what happened. But there were some oversights in the rehabilitation that have delayed its opening. So this is a picture now in the basement of the Wellington house. This is the foundation arch for one of the fireplaces and chimney stacks in the house. And if you look up here, this is the support structure for the first floor. And these are the joists that hold up the first floor. And if you know anything about modern buildings, you know that modern houses, or if you've been in your basement and looked at the ceiling of your basement, the support of the floor of your first floor, you know the joists are much closer together, and the joists are much deeper down. These joists are not structurally enough to support large groups in the house. And so the building department would not give us an occupancy permit for having group functions in the house. We couldn't even have school classes come through and visit the house. And so we are in the process of having an architect and engineer working up plans for rehabilitating this floor by putting in joists in between here, by helping with other support beams. We've actually determined that the large beams in the basement are still structurally sound enough to take the weight, but that the joists really are not sufficient. And another problem with the floor, now this is a picture of the first floor in one of the front rooms in the house, and you'll see it actually looks quite nice inside. And we're hopeful that once we can get an occupancy permit, we will be able to have the public in there, and then be able to formulate better plans for how to utilize the house with public input. But we can't even have people come through it to look until we get these structural problems fixed. Also, the floor itself, you'll notice these cracks in the floor. Those cracks are large enough to trap high heels and to break ankles. And so we have to replace this floor. This hole here is one that we drilled in order to determine what the structure of the floor was underneath and how much rehabilitation it's going to take. So those details are being worked out as we speak. They're pretty well finalized at this point. However, some more problems have now come to light as we've had an architect and engineer looking at stuff at the house. For instance, this is the front door of the house. This front door was inspected by an architectural historian back in, I think it was like 2007, and she determined that in fact this is probably the original front door of the house from 1779 is when the house was built. And by the way, this is an excellent example of a larger Georgian period farmhouse from around the time of the Revolutionary War. And so unfortunately, this door is in rather poor condition. Did I show? Yeah, this is the bottom left corner of it. You can see it's rotting out. There are problems with opening and closing it. Right now, it's fastened shut. We have to be able to get it in condition that it can be opened in case of fire regulations. We can't have the doors permanently shut on the house. And so that's something that was not foreseen before of a problem. And so that's, yes.
What is your best guess for having the house open to the public time-wise?
Well, we had a $15,000 CPC grant that the architect and engineer have used up in doing the structural stuff. In addition to these issues with the doors, it turns out that there are handicapped access issues also that have to be addressed. A handicapped parking place has to be made usable. The handicapped ramp that is there turns out to be not quite legally proper. And so it in fact has to be ripped out and a new one put in. And so we are now seeking, we will be seeking anyway, a $5,000 addition to the grant that we have from CPC so that the architect can go ahead with adding these additional things that have now come to light of the doors and the handicapped parking access and so on. And once we do that, then we have to go to the CPC and then City Council and the mayor to be able to get funds to actually do the construction. And that funding, I'm not sure how much it's going to cost, but it probably will be on the order of $150,000 additional funding. So if all of that happens, then, you know, a year from now, maybe.
Okay, so realistically, if you're saying a year from now, if all the pieces fall into place, we're probably looking 2 to 3 years between the pandemic and money and everything else?
Yeah, maybe, but construction is going on. Construction is one of those things that actually hasn't been interfered with that much by, you know, by the pandemic. So who knows? I don't know.
So a minimum of a year.
I would say probably a minimum of a year.
Okay. Because somebody wanted to know when the league could hold meetings at the White House.
I would love it if we could do that, but you know, that's the reason that we can't, because the floor won't support it, as well as these other reasons we can't. We have public access until we've got the handicap parking situation under control either.
Well, then I have another question asking, will you accept private donations to help pay for the restoration?
I don't know how to handle private money. Any private money that comes into the city has to go, I know, through City Council. It has to be accepted by City Council. And then they decide who gets the money, what it's used for, I think. It's between City Council and Mayor. I'm not clear on those kinds of things. I don't know if Diana is involved in the meeting or not, but she might know how that works.
It's worth looking into. I know when I've been to City Council meetings, whenever there's been a donation, nobody has ever turned it down, but I'm sure it's a little bit more complicated than that to earmark the funds specifically.
Right, and the Historical Commission has no way of actually accepting money from the public.
But you are able to get grants, so.
We are able to get grants, yes.
So it sounds like a little bit of talking might be able to provide a structure where private citizens could make a donation that could be used. It's worth looking into, not by you, but maybe we'll make a couple calls and see what we can find out.
Yeah. No, I, you know, and George Darcy might be, you know these kinds of things. I mean, certainly he's interested in the house.
Diana did answer you. She says, I've seen the council approve the money for the purpose for which it's given.
Okay, so
again, it's a step along the way.
Yes. Okay, so Payne Estate. I would like to show you this on the Payne Estate, since that's another large asset that the city has, and a wonderful asset, but it does have some problems. Again, and here is a funding application to CPC that Ann Clifford and the Historical Commission has just submitted for $750,000 roughly for doing remedial construction work on Stonehurst, the Robert Tree Payne Estate. This has gone through the CPC successfully. It's gone through the committee from the council, and it's now going to the full council, I believe. And let me show you the kinds of issues that come up. I don't think I need to go through details about Stonehurst and how important it is that, you know, it was designed by H.H. Richardson, and the landscaping was all done, so on and so on. But anyway, here is some of the problems that we have. This is, as you approach Stonehurst from the parking lot, this is the view of the house you see. The main entrance door to the house is located here. This pillar right down here on the lower right is the main support pillar of the roof and the porch above the main entrance porch here. And if you look here, you can kind of make out the fact that the axis of the top here is in one direction and the axis of the support column is in a different direction. The support structure here is actually buckling. And right now there is a 2x4 or something larger, 4x4 or something that was put in here just as an added structural support. We have to take this apart, we have to repair it and put it back in place as kind of one of the things that has to be done. And of course, this is a very decorative element, and so it has to be done, replaced properly on the house to maintain its historic integrity. So that's one kind of problem. There are other kinds of problems along with that on the Payne estate. I don't know if I can quickly find another, yeah. This is the view if you're standing in the yard in that large grassy area in front of the Payne estate and looking at the house. So this is a second floor porch on the H.H. Richardson wing. It's called a loggia, and it also is having problems with the support columns for the loggia and the structure of the loggia. So that's shown here. Here is a picture of the loggia, and you can see again there are extra supports that have been added here just so that things don't fall down. So there are some fundamental issues that need attention. It's been 20 years since any kind of major structural work has been done on the Payne estate. And so that's now what the Historical Commission has is historic oversight of the building. The Conservation Commission has oversight of the grounds away from the building, but the grounds right near the building and the building itself are under the oversight of the commission. And so we need to double check all of this and make sure that in fact it's done properly to maintain the integrity of the whole historic resources of the city. Okay. So now other city buildings. And I won't go into too much detail on this, but other city buildings that are brought to our attention by the city when they come to us for advice. So the Wellington House and Stonehurst, we have historical oversight legally, and so we can initiate issues with those. Other public buildings in the city we don't have, and so we need to have the city come to us for advice. And so the city has done that on City Hall. The windows, the cupola on the top of the City Hall and so on are being rehabilitated, and those all have come before the Historical Commission to look at what the architects have come up with and for us to agree that it's appropriate. The Moody Street Fire Station is another example of this. I'm sure you've all seen the new firehouse being built on Moody Street and how to connect that to the old firehouse, how to rehab the original firehouse, which is quite historic. Again, Chief McGinnis, the fire chief, came to us and presented their plans, and we went over them and we discussed and we came to agreement on what was reasonable for that from both sides. So those.
Yeah, I have a question here. Is the Waltham Historical Commission involved in Fernald? And second question, how do you interact with the state and federal commissions?
Okay, as far as Fernald goes, as I said, the city has to come to us.
Okay.
Now they did for the Cardinal Cottage, which was the wooden house, the Greek Revival house that's on Trapelo Road, right by the entrance, near the entrance road to the Fernald. And in fact, we spent quite a bit of time. At one point, the city was interested in turning that into housing, subsidized housing. And so they came to us and we worked with the architect on that. Spent a couple meetings, at least, of the Historical Commission on that. I don't know what holdups were after that, but of course, as you probably do know, there was a fire in that a week or two ago. And so it looks like at this point it probably will be demolished.
And we had another question about Arrigo Farms, and I'm going to assume the city has to come to you.
That's correct. That's correct. The Arrigo Farm, again, is an extremely historically significant building. You know, the farm there has been there since the Puritans, and the house is from the early 1800s. Barnes, it's a Thomas Barnes house, and Thomas Barnes was a sea captain who married into the Warren family, and it was a Warren house, so yeah, Warren Street and so on. But again, the city has to come to us for help on that.
Okay, we have about 10 more minutes.
Okay, well,
if you have that much, or I didn't see your presentation ahead of time.
Maybe you should have, but anyway, a couple other things. There's Section 106 reviews for federal related projects and similar state reviews for projects. So when there's a project that requires federal or state licensing or money, then the State Historical Commission has input to decisions on that. And they usually come to the local historical commission, to the Waltham Historical Commission, for advice on that. And so, for instance, we often get inquiries about cell phone antennas because that requires federal licensing. And so the question is, does this cell phone antenna interfere with the historical significance of this telephone pole it's on, or something like that? So that's a Section 106 review. Historical inventories. I did want to say something about this. One of our responsibilities, according to the establishing legislation, in fact, is to do historical surveys of the city. And those historical surveys have been done in the past. The last major ones were done in the 1980s. In the 1980s, they didn't have the kind of information that we have now. So let me see if okay, you probably can't see this, so let me stop.
I can see the city website.
Oh, you can. Oh, good.
Yes.
Why some works and some doesn't, I don't know. Anyway, find it fast. If you go to Find It Fast and then to Maps Online, this gives you the city GIS system. And so let's plug in here, say 55 School Street, which is the middle school. Bingo. Okay. So notice when you do that, it says here historic. So that building is historic. Notice there are a lot of other historic structures around there too, but if we map it, now all because it says historic, if it came up for a demo, we would certainly take a careful look at it, but all because it doesn't say historic doesn't mean that it's not historic. It just means that it was picked up on some inventory before, but the inventories are not complete. So here is 55 School Street, and what I'm going to do is show you over here, it says maps. If you go to maps here and go to choose the historic properties, and then go to selection, it's a little tedious, and go to historic buildings, then you'll see on the map here a bunch of buildings pop out in red. Those are the ones that have been determined before to be historically significant. So this is Lyman Street here. There are a lot of historic buildings along Lyman Street. Pick any one, red here. And it comes up Josiah Rutter House, Italianate, built 1848. Click here for additional information. If you do that, it throws you into what's known as MACRIS. And you'll hear us talk a lot about MACRIS, which is the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System. And this is where those inventory forms go. So when a historical architect does surveys in a city, they write up these state historical commission form Bs, B as in boy, and those are for buildings. And so if we go here and click inventory, then hopefully it will bring it up. Uh-oh, it's going to take a little while. There we go. All right. Can you still see that?
Yes, we can.
Good. So this is one of those inventory forms. And for this nice Italianate house, done in 1986. And so these inventories are mostly old. Now there was one that was done in let's see if I get back to where I want to go here. Okay, here we go. So there was one that was done in 2011. And so this shows the map of the houses that were studied in 2011. So down Main Street, down Moody Street, and in the Ellison Park area. And so those forms have all been updated. So we have much better information. Of course, since 1986 to now, there's a lot more available information electronically. So it's a lot easier to do these surveys. What we want to do is now we are seeking, we have funding, $15,000 from the state, matching grants, $15,000 from our local CPC, total $30,000 to do surveys of a couple areas in the city. One area is down here for the Boston Manufacturing Company housing. There's now a house on Central Street that's coming before us for our hearing this month, and its form is rather old. And it would be good because this is an area, again, where there have been a number of demolitions of historically significant houses in recent times. And so we want to have those updated. We want to have that area around here in the south side, around Oak Street and Newton Street, where the 44 Oak Street was. Because again, there are demolitions occurring there and we don't have good knowledge of that area. And also here in the watch factory area, between Crescent Street here and Moody Street, this area here also needs updating of forms where there have been a lot of demolition delays. So that's one type of historic inventory. Another type of historic inventory is stone walls. We've done a lot of work on stone walls, historic stone walls around Waltham. And so again, if you go to our website, there's a lot of information on this on the website. And so for instance, if we zoom in here a little, this is Prospect Hill Park. With a lot of well-preserved stone walls. In fact, more than what's shown here. These stone walls are done from aerial surveys. We've now had ground surveys done in Prospect Hill Park. And we've had ground surveys done in a couple other areas like Shady's Pond area here. Do you see the website?
Yes, now we see the stone wall location.
Okay. Okay. So, and do you see that map?
Yes, that map we see.
Okay, good. Okay. Sorry.
The other screen open.
Yeah, so let me just quick show here at this is a Shady's Pond, Northeast Elementary School area. You'll see there are a lot of stone walls in this area. Believe it or not, those stone walls demark boundary lines going back to the 1600s. Actually, the original land grants were made in 1636. And these stone walls date probably from 1670, something like that. And so some of the oldest masonry structures in the country are located right here in Waltham. In 1636, there were land grants made that were, the boundaries of it were parallel and perpendicular to the border with Lexington. And that's why these stone walls are lined up that way. And that's why many streets in Waltham, in fact, are lined up that way also, because they go along with these land grants. And so we have researched these stone walls and written reports on these stone walls. And so if you go back to the commission webpage, you can find here the old stone walls of Nippermar Park, old stone walls of Prospect Hill Park, Shady's Pond, and so on. So that's all part of our effort to do historical surveys in the city. And the final historical survey I want to talk about was the Mass Central Railroad. We are in the process of trying to keep an inventory of the historical resources along the Mass Central Railroad. And so Marie Daly and I, and this is Rachel Malley and her husband from the Historical Society have come out and helped us to survey along the whole route of the community path along the Mass Central Railroad and to find the historical resources. So you'll see these three pillars here, concrete pillars, they look like mushrooms. They're actually something called a rail rest in quite good condition when the railroad used to pick up track or lay new track to repair the railroad. They would store them on these rail rests. And so we've marked the historical resources with this green tape and put together an inventory of these things on paper, and have been working with the planning department, with Catherine Cagle and the planning department, so that we would alert the crews that come in to demolish the old railroad bed here to be careful of these historical resources, so that hopefully we can preserve them and have signage up along the new community path once it gets built. So I guess I would just say for CPC, another duty that we have is for CPC is informing the CPC of the historical value of any buildings or projects that come before them. So we've written a number of letters of support for projects. And we also, if CPC money is being used to rehabilitate a building on the basis of historical significance, then that rehabilitation has to be done in a proper way. And so we have to inspect, we have to first stipulate before it's built and look at the plans for it to make sure it's going to be done in the proper way. And there are national standards for this called the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Historic Rehabilitation. And then we have to inspect these projects afterwards to make sure that they'd adhered to what the plans were. So Sacred Heart Church, Gore Estate, Charles River Museum, Music Hall building, Stonehurst, those are all examples of where we've had to do this. Educational and outreach, we also have responsibilities there. So again, on the website, there are, probably have to stop the share here. And so this is the end of it here. If I can get back to the website. Can you see that?
We can see that.
Stonewall locations. So back here on the website, there are historic sites along the old Boston Post Road in Waltham. So this is a brochure that the commission has put together for touring along Main Street and Weston Street, looking at the historic structures along it. And we have one there also for North Waltham. And we are now beginning the process of a house plaque program to mark houses in the city with plaques that give the year in which the house was built. So that ends what I had prepared. So
well, I have just a couple of questions here. Can you protect older historical trees or other natural resources?
You know, the way the demo delay ordinance is written, it says buildings.
Okay.
And buildings are defined as housing animals, people, or things. And so unless you can make a legal argument that it's a building, then no, we don't have any jurisdiction over it. This is one of the things that happened with the trestles, the railroad trestles that went across the Charles River that were demolished in the last half dozen years.
Okay. And the other comment was, members of the commission do not get paid enough for all the work that you do. And I'm just going to echo that as well. This has been fascinating, Mort. I cannot thank you enough for the time, for the preparation, and for your expertise. I know I learned a lot. I'm absolutely certain the audience did as well.
Good. I apologize if I bored anyone, but hopefully not. So.
Well, they would have left, and nobody left. So you're in good shape there.
Okay.
Again, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank the audience so much for your questions. They've been quite enlightening. And within a few days, a recording of this will be up on our website and up on YouTube. Have a wonderful evening, and we will see you all the next time.
Okay. So long.
Bye.